Good evening. Welcome to Southern Shift Episode 2. This is a production of the Arkansas Progressive Democrats Caucus. I'm Joshua Vale. I'm the Communications Officer for the caucus. I'm here with Kenny Grand, who is one of our co-chairs. We're going to be talking tonight about really solidarity versus charity, what we mean when we talk about those things, and kind of why one is preferable to the other. But first, we're going to also talk about some of the stuff the caucus has been doing in the last month with the working groups, starting with media, which I facilitate. In addition to this production, media has been working on promoting caucus membership and getting new members to join. Through social media, we've helped to raise awareness for events for the Red Cup Rebellion, which is part of efforts to unionize local Starbucks locations in various counties in Arkansas. And we're always looking for new people to join media. We meet on our caucus Discord Tuesdays at 3 p.m. Always interested in people interested in video production, writing, any of that stuff, looking to grow our YouTube, TikTok, video production platforms like that. So no skill required. Passion is more important, but that's what we've been doing in media.
Yeah, and the events group has slowed down a little bit since it's the holiday times. Hey, Tanya. But we did have a fundraising event on November 21st, which raised about $200. And we're also organizing a CIP training here in the middle of this next month, where essentially it's for candidates. It's a pretty in-depth series that we're going to do 3 of for people who are running for office here in Arkansas, to just kind of inventory their needs and figure out what they need to do to be best well equipped to campaign. Also, how to set their targeting and their expectations. Candidate infrastructure program. The media group has actually been drafting on that a little bit too, or mainly Ryan Giglio, who was in the last stream. Other than that, we do have an upcoming debate. It's an open debate in District 77, which is West Little Rock. It's going to be at, I can get the details or ask Kathleen or somebody to post it in the thread here. I'm sorry, I don't have it written down. Let's see. Fundraising, we kind of retooled the working group because setting up the way that we need to is going to require setting up 2 separate bank accounts and setting up 2 separate structures, because we're a caucus within the Democratic Party. And so we kind of work as a club like that. We have members who give member donations, and some people give monthly. And we do education programming, and a lot of the debates and the public education programming will be with the auxiliary part of the caucus. But we also are going to be setting up a PAC, so that we can do more in-depth work. We can do voter education programs, get out the vote programs, partner with nonprofits to set up GOTV initiatives and apply for grants and stuff like that. So we've been mainly doing administration during the fundraising groups. Do you want to chat about the electoral group for a second?
Yeah, the electoral group, working on candidate recruitment. There's a District 77 primary debate coming up, which will give candidates an opportunity to really talk about the issues in depth. And the electoral group's also talking about hosting or running debates in other areas. We have also the Bearcat system, which is basically a voter information database. And it's able to quickly generate basically lists for text banking and canvassing based on specific areas, specific districts. So that's the things that the electoral group has been working on.
Yeah, and then, of course, that will get a lot busier as we get to and through the primary season, because we'll be able to really hone in and concentrate on bringing the proper aid to the Democratic candidates we have. And the Bearcat system is something that we supply to member candidates, but also other people can use it if they inquire. They inquire. I'm sorry, my voice is kind of iffy, but I'm pretty sure it'll hold up. So, and as far as labor goes, we've got one labor campaign we're working on. We're currently setting up, and I did skip a section, but we can pop back to that, I suppose. But we're currently working on a workplace organizing guide based on trainings from the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee and various unions. There's been a new movement going where people have been building support networks and training people how to like develop their own union campaigns in the place, because historically there hasn't been much in the way of a service sector labor movement. Most of the labor movement activity that's gone on historically was, of course, in the skilled trades or in the public sector. And those, of course, are where like the vast minority of unions, that's where the majority of unions are, but they're in such a vast minority now, and they've been really like scrambling to try and find new means of organization. And so we've taken things that we've learned from the labor movement as well as the Southern Civil Rights Movement. We're synthesizing it into a pretty comprehensive handbook. It's like 38 pages right now. Um, so we've got the organizing manual, and we're also wanting to start doing lectures and workshops on the service sector. We put out like this 3-piece report on the conditions of people working in the Arkansas service sector, and it's really stark. But the idea is to go out and start having those conversations with service sector workers and finding avenues for them to organize for self-determination, and also coming up with ways to build the political and legislative will and language to fix the situation of the Arkansas worker. So that's the working work group, and we do that with the legislative working group as well.
Yeah, the legislative working group has been working on sample text for bills, county, state, municipal level. About 10 bills, I think a few more actually now have been written. The most traction that's been gotten outside of the caucus has been for a food desert bill, which would essentially help with establishing grocery stores in underserved areas. At least 3 candidates have actually made it part of their campaign platform, so that's really cool.
Yeah,
Um,
hope to continue to do is write bills that could garner bipartisan support, but we could get these candidates to adopt them to where they're doing something other than just having, slogans, 2 or 3 word slogans. They'll be able to go to the public and be like, "I want to push to pass this bill." But yeah, and we've also got some on municipal levels. There's some folks in Washington County and a couple other counties actually that are inquiring about it on the JP level. A bill to help streamline the voter registration process for people who have committed felonies but have like paid all their fines and fees and done their time. Um, because right now it's burdensome, but because of the fact that you can't really necessarily legislate civil rights on a county level anymore because of this regressive bill that was passed a few years back, we couldn't really restructure the law itself. So we just streamlined. Somebody could come into a county clerk's office and sign an affidavit of identity stating that they've like fulfilled all their duties to a satisfactory level. And because the clerk has to check that anyway in order to reinstate the person's voting status, we just have sort of the onus of that work put on the clerk's office, where you don't have, where people with access issues, people with technological access issues, or just access to their own information will be able to still have the agency to register to vote. And there's numerous other ones as well. And that group meets on Fridays. Labor and legislation both meet on Fridays.
and last on the working groups, we've got mutual aid. The mutual aid group is not meeting at this time. We're retooling that to focus more on internal aid projects for members within the caucus, which is going to help foster unity in the caucus and create a solidarity culture between membership, which is a perfect segue into our main topic. But there's a couple other things that we've done recently. Recently, we had new elections of officers. We established a communications officer, which I was nominated for and voted in last night at our general business meeting. We also established operations officer, modified some of the duties of the secretary, and established a treasurer specific to the PAC, the Political Action Committee. But one of the really things that I think is super important is that we also pushed a resolution calling for a ceasefire in the Israel-Palestine conflict. And that is, it borrows some language from a similar resolution from the Texas Democratic Party. But we sent that out as a press release to media throughout the state, as well as to the Arkansas Democratic Party leadership. And really, that helps. It's important for us to put out these kinds of statements to kind of push the leaders within Arkansas politics, uh, push them to call for a ceasefire as well, because of just the amount of American tax dollars that are going to support the genocide that's currently happening in Palestine. Something that we really shouldn't be involved in, we shouldn't be funding. And hopefully, this resolution helps get us closer to that.
Yeah, and we're pushing for other caucuses to adopt it, other progressive organizations, and ultimately the state Democratic Party of Arkansas. It's pretty remarkable that it was the Texas Democratic Party that passed this, because one would assume that it'd be somewhere like New York or California or New Jersey or somewhere where there's more embedded liberals or progressives and whatnot. But Texas was the originator, and I think that if we can get red states like Texas and Arkansas and Georgia and others to organize to pressure their parties, they can in turn pressure the National Democratic Party, and we could also like see the party itself putting pressure on representatives, because that needs to happen. We've seen like slight policy changes with Biden, where Biden initially was unequivocally supporting the Israeli incursion, but now is calling for a ceasefire and a timeline, yet at the same time is pulling together a broad-based coalition to engage the Houthis, who've been disrupting the flow of weapons and supplies for the ongoing genocide. And so we're trying to be vocal about that in any way we can. So we encourage you to go look at our resolution. And if you're in the Democratic Party, consider sending it on to party leadership, members of your county party chapters, and others to see if they'd like to adopt it. Because that way, if we had to, we could do it from a county by county basis to build the general will. But it's something that we should definitely push for. And we talked about the quarterly much. Did we bring that up?
So yeah, end of next month, we are going to be putting out a quarterly publication. That's something we've been doing for just a little over a year now. It's a magazine format, and any submissions, anything you want to write for that, anything that you want to send in as photos, you can send to the caucus email, or if you're in the Discord already, if you're a member or become a member during that, between now and when the quarterly is going to be ready to go, just go ahead and share it there as well. Written submissions, 600 words minimum. And for photos, just the highest resolution you have, with, of course, a description of what's going on in the picture and attribution, however you or whoever took the photo would want to be credited for it.
Yeah, and it'd be nice to see more contributions from people around the state. The one before, we had a lot of outside contributors, but the last one that we did was mainly sort of a mapping of the organization, which I think was necessary. We also had some labor material in it as well. But we're definitely looking for stuff. And if you are a candidate, don't be ashamed to self-promote. That's the point of the publication, is to let people know who's out there, and what's going on, and to kind of like help push the Overton window. It's the same as us issuing these statements. It helps build like a solid identity. People know what our politics are, and people are able to like do what they can to counter this massive rightward shift in American politics.
So as I said earlier, the mutual aid piece would have been a pretty good segue, but I think that this is a good time now. I think we've pretty much covered everything with the caucus, what's going on. So I think it's a good time to segue into our main topic. As I said, we're going to be talking about kind of the difference between solidarity and charity, and I'm going to kind of field some questions, or going to ask some questions and get some answers from Kenny. So kind of an interview format. So first thing off, I think, we talk about these terms, charity and solidarity, but what do we mean, like as leftists, as progressives, what do we mean when we say charity?
Charity suffers from a lot of the same disease as like liberalism is, where you're still having an other, like there's those people, there's an out group. The nonprofit sector was created by the Rockefellers as a tax shelter and like a source to like up their PR. They realized that if they found other ways than paying taxes that benefited them visually, that it would help them get a foot up. And so there's been the creation of a massive sector around it. And like I said, most conceptions of charity are top down. They imply a superior outgroup. It's a way that people can be like, well, I can assuage whatever guilt, or like, my life has been fortunate, so I can give to these people. But it really doesn't do anything to like address the structure of capital and the relations of production or the material reality, right? Like you can, people can be fed every day, but it's not giving them any sort of agency. Um, so they're not structured to give people economic self determination, even though that's what a lot of people claim charity should be for. It's only like treating the symptoms. And that's something that we have to really be critical of as progressives is, if I've got a cold and I'm just treating like my runny nose and not treating the virus, then it's still going to ravage my body. I just won't have as much stuff running out of my nose. Like it doesn't really like change the power balance, and it doesn't really build any sort of sense of self-determination. Um, so yeah, it's treating the symptoms only, and solidarity is more about building the bonds of mutual aid from person to person within a community, and it looks like a bunch of different things.
So I think that's a good segue into what was going to be my next question. So what do we mean when we say solidarity?
Solidarity is it's equal. It's like it's almost familial. It's equal participation. It's designing activities, our daily activities, to meet our needs primarily. It's identifying, having a consciousness as a group of people, and working in ways to forward that. It's feeling a connectedness. It's the opposite of alienation. We live in a very like kind of really isolated, hyper individualist culture that doesn't really have many concepts of collectivism. And so, yeah, solidarity is about it's that classic from each according to their ability, and to each according to their need.
So it kind of sounds like with solidarity is kind of addressing the problem that charity almost helps to create, in that instead of it being a top down thing where some other decides kind of what you need and how you're going to get it, everyone kind of decides together.
Right. Like before the advent of mercantilism and capitalism, and even before the advent of a lot of like technologization, we lived in what was called the subsistence economy. The subsistence economy was where people, uh, there was a wide amount of care work that was done. It's like cooking food. It's regenerating the labor pool when they get home from their laborings. It's growing your own food. It's hunting. Like it's everything that people had done prior to selling their life's time on the price making market. And so we've like traded away such large swaths of the subsistence economy and such large swaths of like what culturally we used to be. We had a bit of a commons. Everything wasn't ultra commodified. And so now the paradigm is kind of changed, and the one way to break through that is to start considering like I said, designing our activity to meet human needs and not simply for the profit motive.
Um, what are, I guess, what are some other differences between solidarity and charity? I mean, both are, at least in theory, intended to meet needs that people have.
Um, Solidarity and charity involves a sense of agency and ownership. Like people who need stuff are deciding what their needs are. A lot of the times with charity, you are kind of like assuming certain needs. And I've noticed that in a lot of things, like even when we'll come back to stuff about the tornado probably in the discussion. But even during the tornado, like there was, I was offered 78 turkey sandwiches a day, but there was nobody out there like helping people to fill out their FEMA relief forms, right? Because, especially out around when the picture that we just posted here, I believe was in Sherwood. And it was a small business. It was a salon that three massive trees had fallen on. And so sometimes sometimes it seems very similar, because it's people helping people, but it's more like solidarity is more bottom up, and it's more of just amplifying what's natural amongst working class people. Like growing up as a poor rural person, um, we had one breadwinner in the family, and it was my stepdad, and he made barely over the minimum wage. At in growing up, this was in the late '90s, early 2000s. So every Sunday, the whole family would get together, and a lot of the times they had fished over the weekend, and a lot of the times they just all kind of pitched in and got food, and then sent whoever needed it the most away with whatever leftovers and stuff, help prepare boxes and stuff like that. And it's natural behavior. And even in for example, when the tornado went through there, um, it there were no agencies, really major agencies at the time. And the help that did come to Win stayed downtown. So like FEMA and all the aid organizations stayed downtown when there was primarily working class and poor black neighborhood. They had been razed to the ground for some 20 blocks, and the surrounding communities, like their cars, were completely devastated. And so the charity answer to that was setting up a couple food drives and passing out food to people. Um, and then the solidarity side of that was what they actually did, which was set up like an online network. They used Facebook, and they set up a mutual aid discussion thread uh, where people who had, because sometimes there was even excesses from donations, but people who had excess could like post that they had it. And people who needed aid, like whether it was like clearing trees off of their houses, or thank you, Trinity, for listening, or clearing yards, or helping get groceries, stuff like that. Like they could post those needs. And that actually existed for a while past the actual thing, while all of the charitable organizations backed out. Like if you look at North Little Rock with the tornado, and I'm only mainly just sticking to this one because it's timely and it's something that affected us. But you had a large relief push until the contractors were able to make it in. And then everybody who had house insurance was fine. Everybody else was thrown under the bus, and nothing was really done to help everybody, because the idea is, a lot of these areas could just be rebuilt. And then when they were actually trying to write legislation, at first they were making it to where you could keep trailers and stuff on the properties so that people could start resettling. But then they started cutting those rules and altering them to the detriment of the people. So yeah, it's more of people having a collective consciousness, and less about let's go take some canned goods to these people and then like leaving them in the dust. It's sort of like, I think we talked about, I don't know if it's here in our notes. Yeah, it does. Like, why is charity a problem? We can get down to that, I suppose, here in a little bit. Also, if anybody has any questions, you can interject as well, and we'll try and field them.
Yeah, leave any comments. We can see them. So we can definitely reply to any questions people have on the topic we're discussing. But I think when we were discussing working on this episode, we'd also talked about some other ways, because we just talked about how the charitable organizations kind of set up stuff that didn't necessarily address the needs that the people had. And you got offered seven, I'm sure that's a slight exaggeration, but 78 turkey sandwiches, which isn't necessarily beneficial.
It wasn't much of an exaggeration, because people just had boxes of bags and bags of sandwiches. There was more sandwiches than people, because everyone was like, "We need to go out and help," and so they all made sandwiches.
But I think as we were working on this episode, we had talked about some other experiences that you had had in the past where the charitable organizations were kind of doing a lot of stuff that wasn't necessarily benefiting anyone.
Yeah, so I got the telemarketing job in Conway, with this company that a lot of people have probably been through. And we would do telemarketing for Mothers Against Drunk Driving and like numerous other charities, and I was getting paid really well. I think I was making like, at the time, like the minimum wage was like 7.25 an hour or so, and I think I was making 12 or 13 bucks an hour. My direct advisor had like a massive SUV. And I was just kind of like, as I was working there, I just started mathing it out. And I was just like, something's not making sense. And so I honestly just asked them, I was like, how much of this actually goes to the people? And they were like, well, there's administrative costs. And I'm like, no, how much? And they were like, well, sometimes as low as 4 to 6%. And a lot of the times, like another need, like I joined working with the New South Produce Cooperative. It's one type of cooperative that we can cover later on in this. But it was sponsored by the Heifer Foundation, and they tried to run it like a foundation. Yeah, H Club made 28 an hour there. Yeah. Yeah, the Heritage Club. Yeah, I think that's what it was. Yeah, and hi, Aunt Chris. We forgot to say that too. But they had three people. They were trying to make it to where three people worked in the office for upwards of $40,000 a year, selling like produce boxes part time. So not only was it unsustainable and that we didn't have the revenue to be able to do that without going for constant funding, but it also was unsustainable because it was like the price point had to be so high that the market shrunk to nothing, right? It made it inaccessible. And so we didn't have a big market base, and it was small and boutique, and that's the only way that it was going to be. but because their first priority wasn't about trying to help farmers move and value add products together.
Mm-hmm.
Their first impulse was to build whatever nonprofit entity. So that's one of the reasons that charity a lot of the times is is a problem, and it maintains alienation. And then there was the whole discussion, and a lot of this, like there was a couple discussions that Ed Whitfield had, and y'all can look him up. He works for like the Southern Grassroots Economies Project and other solidarity economy efforts. Was from Little Rock until he was run out of town in the 70s by the sheriffs for his integration work, and went to Malcolm X University, and then became one of the leading authorities on solidarity economies. But he like talks about how the give a man a fish versus teach a man a fish thing is a crock as well, because you can give a man a fish and he'll eat. You can teach a man a fish to how to fish, and like that doesn't mean he's going to eat, because he have a fishing pole? Does he know how to acquire the bait? Who owns the pond? Where is the pond access? Right? Like, well, it's just sort of a false precept. You have to build the material conditions to enable a person to achieve some sense of self-determination. And I think that's the main difference between charity and solidarity and mutual aid.
And we talked about mutual aid, kind of mentioned it a couple times. Is there a difference between mutual aid and solidarity? Is it more just accurate to say that mutual aid is a subset of solidarity?
Mutual aid's a subset of solidarity. Sometimes the lines blur even between. I prefer to use solidarity a lot, because sometimes the lines do blur between mutual aid and charity. Sometimes people actually doing it, because I've done like there's stuff that we've done that is mutual aid and it's helpful, like the brake light clinics that DSA does here in Little Rock, or I helped with Food Not Bombs for a number of years. But like sometimes you like lose it. So like mutual aid, solidarity has so many different facets, right? It pretty much means that we are kind of kin in struggle. So solidarity might look like building a political entity. Solidarity might look like, defending somebody who's under attack. Like solidarity might be what we did with, putting out the statement with Palestine, saying that we, identify with the validity of the human experience of the people living in Palestine. Um, but yeah, but mutual aid is solidarity in action. And the main thing that I think divides it from charity, like I said, is it listens. Like it's about people themselves assessing their needs and assessing their situations and coming up with a realistic and tenable way to address it.
So, what are some mutual aid efforts that are or have gone in and around Arkansas?
So this is a question. It's kind of like what our mutual aid group has been having trouble with, because like mutual aid efforts and organizations kind of crop up, and then they'll have a couple people support them and they'll fall apart because they don't have that greater sense of interconnectedness. And maybe there's just a lack of solidarity. I don't know. But there have been numerous ones in the area and in Arkansas. Little Rock Food Not Bombs, I took part in for about 5 or 6 years. And before me had been going on since the late 90s. Um, and I believe they're trying to start it again. And that's where people pretty much recover food that's going to be thrown away, or that's going to be going to the landfill, and cook it and give it out. And the Cocoon Collective is a newish organization in Northwest Arkansas. We were going to have them on, but I think we just got lost in the back and forth and it being the holidays. But they are doing a lot of work that like kind of shows the difference between solidarity and charity, because they're a shelter and a housing place for young trans and LGBTQIA people. Yeah, Tanya was involved in the early 2000s, and the Broadstones were especially. Um, but they also, like, their leaders came to Little Rock on Saturdays to protest the invasion of Gaza. Like, they helped set up the protest at the armory, and they've also like been reaching out to the immigrant community. And so instead of sort of having their one shop or their one focus, they're still working in conjunction and solidarity with other groups. The Lucy's Place also is a similar situation to that. Um, it's a shelter that's being run as a housing collective, and they've got a couple of buildings now, and they have eventual aspirations of setting up land trusts and setting up structures for the economic self determination of the community. Um, it's run by primarily people of color and trans and NB people, working class people here in Little Rock. The Grassroots Cooperative was a marketing cooperative, or is, in Clinton. And we'll talk about some of the different types when we look over that little slideshow and stuff. Um, but sometimes, they started with grants, and essentially there's a big vacuum where small farmers, what Ryan say? Did you see what Ryan said, by the way?
Yeah.
They're like,
He said, I really liked that work we did making and delivering food to people during the height of COVID. Wish it had kept going.
yeah, and we were working on getting it to keep going, but sometimes there's just people who are bad bureaucrats, and I'll leave it at that. But we were actually landing. So when COVID hit, and I'll go back to the grassroots thing in a second, but this is worth bringing up. When COVID first hit, we set up like a collection program in a way that people could donate goods or money without making contact. And then we got them to reach out into the community to find people who were immunocompromised or homebound, and set them up with provision deliveries where we would send masks, disinfectants, and clothes and other things. And we ran that for about 5 weeks or so, and then I was able to move with a group of other food entrepreneurs into the county fair complex, and we had a massive kitchen complex set up there, and we're doing USDA funded food relief programming that was ostensibly it would have fed tens of thousands of people a week.
Mm.
Unfortunately, like I said, there were people who wanted too much too soon of the pie, and so the USDA cut off the supply. Um, but that was something that, like, the people who did that are the same people that I went to first when the tornadoes hit. And there's just people and people in different communities. And we've been developing over the course of years, like working relationships with people in communities that don't necessarily always look like us. The Islamic Center for Human Excellence in Little Rock, primarily a Black Muslim church, and they're the one group that I like look to when things start to get bad, because they're the first people looking to find pragmatic ways to mitigate the suffering. But back to grassroots, they set it up as a way they could actually market and make small ranches tenable again. And then there's been various worker cooperatives in Arkansas. The last one that I had a part in, fell apart because of COVID. But we had a cafe at the law school, and it was primarily poor and immigrant owned business, which was pretty cool. Um, and then regionally, I look a lot at Cooperation Jackson. I don't know if people have ever heard of Cooperation Jackson, but it's out of Jackson, Mississippi. And they've had very progressive mayors over the years. And actually, it's the son of a former mayor that they set up the political will for a solidarity economy and the political infrastructure for a solidarity economy before actually getting the ground stuff started, which was really interesting. But now they've got multi-sector worker cooperatives, a community land trust, and they're actively working to propagate models of community ownership and worker ownership in Jackson, Mississippi. And if we as a caucus got things really going in our mutual aid group, we could consider maybe developing initiatives to work alongside them regionally. That's all I can think about offhand. I'm sure I'm missing people. If you are part of a mutual aid effort or have been, feel free to post it up here in the thread. But yes, mutual aid's part of a sort of a greater solidarity economy. And I guess maybe we can delve into that.
Yeah, so you've brought up that term before, the solidarity economy. Kind of walk us through that. And I think we've got some, there's a wheel that it kind of goes around. So every part feeds into every other part, but we couldn't find any wheel graphics. So we kind of turned it into a PowerPoint, which is very cool.
Yeah,
PowerPoints are cool.
And very bad. You can't see it, but if you go on my Facebook, I think it's my. I might change it back if it's but it's like my skin. Everybody's got cool vacation pictures, and I've just kept that, and it's been cool because it's had people talk about it. So yeah, if you want to go ahead and put the first slide up. Is it up?
It
Here we
is. Consumption.
Consumption. So that's the end of the cycle, but we can start at the end of the cycle because it is a cycle. So the idea is that, and it's not stated in this thing, but we live in a society that's been hyper commodified, and the economy as itself exists in a vacuum. We want to go back to creation if we can, but if not, we can stay at consumption. There we
Yeah.
go.
Okay,
But
creation.
but it exists in a vacuum, and it's sort of the rational self-interest of individuals is what drives the market, whereas the solidarity economy re-embeds it in, because right now it's literally being treated as if it exists in a vacuum. Capitalism, the capitalist price making market economy, has to continually expand in the intensity and throughput of goods and services, or else it'll die because its investors will dry up and it'll die. And we live in a finite sphere, so it's the mentality of a cancer cell. And so, what the solidarity economy is attempting to do is to build sort of counter institutional substructures to challenge the legitimacy of capitalism. So it starts with creation, cultural creation, collective land ownership, where people could re-enter into many aspects of the subsistence economy that I talked about, ecological creation, which is even like one of the things that I got really into in farming, and we'll return to that when I begin farming again, is embracing the complexity of systems and building ecologically solvent and resilient structures. And the commons, the reestablishment of the commons. Some people, I can argue that I'm conservative in a lot of the ways as a poor white Southerner, because we don't have the commons anymore. We don't have the open air markets anymore. We don't have a lot of the aspects that kind of held society together, because a lot of that, when everything got hyper kind of materialized, fell by the wayside. all the cafes where the old people used to go and hang out and talk, a lot of those stuff. So the recreation of the cost, counter institutional substructures, yeah, it's like in many ways we have to build like counter institutional authorities to challenge the legitimacy of that. And that's what a lot of our political work is. So that's in the creation side. Localism is definitely the key for restoring the commons. And then there's a production side, and there's different ways that we can kind of rethink production. And some of these things, like self-employment, are. I mean, I would totally like to help people start cottage businesses above board and help people like build their own means of self-employment. But you know, it takes more than that, but that's definitely a good part of it. Producer cooperatives, there's different types of cooperatives. So you've got worker cooperatives, you've got producer cooperatives, and you've got consumer cooperatives. And sometimes there's fusions. So if you look at Black Star Brewery in Austin, if you Google it, it's a worker-owned brewery. They fundraised $3 million to open this brewery in Austin, Texas, and they did it by having a fusion of buy-in from the worker owners, from the worker for the worker cooperative side, where people who wanted to be workers would take payroll deductions for a number of months while they went through the process of learning the administration and also ascertaining their role. But then it was also a consumer cooperative. So they fundraised for it by having block parties and getting people to buy non-voting consumer shares. So it was essentially like paying for a Kroger card, to where a percentage of the profits after reinvestments were made, after fines and after fees and bills and inventory restock and disbursements to the workers, after all that was said and done, they would send disbursements out to the people who bought these consumer shares. And it ended up, for the people in the community, a boon, because like they were able to purchase these things which had more dividends than your average CD. So you're like taking in another the Renaissance grocery cooperative in I believe North Carolina was another one that was started that was similar to that, where people sold consumer shares. And what happened was the profits stayed in the community, because they went to the community members, or they went to the workers. And so worker ownership is what it means. That's not to say that there aren't managers. That's not to say that there aren't different pay grades a lot of the time. But there's not a person who is like, either I was born into this business, or, I was able to start this. There's not the one person who claims to have ownership of everything because they cover the initial opportunity cost. And then producer cooperatives, they're like farmer cooperatives. That's what the grassroots cooperative was. It was a producer cooperative. I always kind of countered that if it was a worker cooperative, it would have still been existent, because we wouldn't be paying 3 people to sit in the office for $40,000 a year, while the 2 packers and truck drivers like barely made their allocations time. Clan-based family collective production, uh, and democratic ESOPs. I don't remember what that is, so I'm looking it up. So that's on the production side. It's about refiguring production and realizing that your life's time is being turned into a commodity, and you therefore have become the ultimate commodity. And the one thing that should be done to liberate ourselves is to take our time back, which means taking back the fruits of our labor. You'd be surprised that the right wing people this actually even also appeals to. It's kind of funny. Anyway, exchange and transfer. There's different ways to, under a solidarity economy, to take these goods that have been conceived of in the cultural commons and the collective, the collectives, and produced in these different arrangements. There's also different ways like gifts, the gift economy. not necessarily having a reason for exchange, fair trade, or buying products that are produced by people who are enfranchised or um, family businesses and or like ecologically, little C communism, right? Barter clubs, solidarity markets, sliding scale prices, and also building like independent community currencies. Like these are all ways that people could um, build alternatives to the mainstream market. Um, and then on the consumption side, you've got the waste outputs, but what's not in the whole chart is that sometimes under a solidarity economy, you can plan your economy. So there's things like industrial hybridization, where the offputs for a productive process are used as new inputs for another one. Like if you take fly ash from a coal plant and use it to build drywall, boop, there you go. But the consumption, self-provisioning, what's it called? Autopoiesis. It's called autogestion. It's called self-determination. It's why they killed the Black Panther leaders, because the community itself was achieving some aspects of self-determination and challenging. There wouldn't be school programs if it weren't for the Panthers setting up their mutual aid networks. There would be no school lunch programs. There's getting to where there's not anymore anyway. Uh, and there's a lot of health clinics and stuff. The Red Cross was a reaction to people in World War One. A lot of the armies would just leave people to die in the fields. So the Red Cross was the Black Cross was a volunteer organization, and that was overtaken by the states, nonprofits. But on consumption, provisioning, consumer co-ops, like I said, that's a way that you can, as a community, support the creation of cooperatives or locally owned businesses and reap the benefits locally, because the consumer in the end would be a partial beneficiary. Ethical purchasing, that goes back to buying fair trade, buying union, buying worker owned if you can, and housing co-ops and collectives. And that's like, there's a good, I did most of my solidarity economy studies in Texas because for some reason the Dallas Austin metro region has so many different types of cooperatives. Housing cooperatives is definitely one. There are a lot of UT students who can't afford the housing rates there. Luckily, there's a lot of old housing cooperatives that take on tenants who live collectively. Not only is there like rent and stuff offset by that, but also they share and take turns in duties of food prep and stuff like that.
Mm.
And then surplus allocation. That's the big thing. After consumption, after you've created it, after your workers have been paid, after the exchange has been done, after any of the wastes that could be repurposed are repurposed, you're left with surplus ideally. And a lot of that can go into different stuff. And when we talk about wanting to rework the mutual aid working group, there's stuff in here that we could kind of think about doing. Self-financing, credit unions, community financing. I used to beta test for this thing called Puddle, where everyone would pitch in a little bit of money and anybody in the group could borrow without interest or a small interest fee that we had all decided on, and then just pay it back. They could. Cooperative loan funds. There's one called Shared Capital that's like a $5 million fund that specifically finances worker-owned businesses. And they use surpluses from other different successful cooperatives were able to kick some of their surplus over into this NGO. They're not evil, all of them, but it's still a screwy system. Recycling, And savings, cooperative food storage. And another thing that I haven't seen in here is value added processing. That's something that I want to do politically in Arkansas is create ways to create value added products out of the primary produce of Arkansas farmers so you can extend their seasons because there's chunks of the year where farm hands can't work because there's no work to be
Mhm.
had because the land is laying fallow where they could be packing, they could be making jams or ketchup. But anyway, that's sort of that's the explanation of the solidarity economy in abstract.
Hmm. Awesome. I think that's a really good, very thorough explanation. Covers a lot of aspects of it, a lot of stuff that I wasn't aware of, probably other people weren't aware of as well. We've got about 4 minutes left on our time tonight. Do want to kind of have a little bit of a call to action if you're interested in joining the caucus. That I believe we have a tap link for that with the links on how to get to the Discord and the membership sign up form, that sort of thing. Um, not we don't require dues, but of course, member donations are welcome. We've got the website link, got the website address up on the thing as well, up on the screen, as well as a QR code that'll take you to, I believe that goes to the tap link or something similar.
Yeah,
And the next episode. Oh, sorry, Kenny.
I was just gonna say we primarily meet on Discord and do our daily planning there. And you can get to that on that link. You can also get a link to the Discord server on the membership forum. If you live in a rural county, especially join. We started this with y'all. That's something that I like to bring up, just as a kind of a little shaky fist to the urbanites. For a couple of years, we discussed setting up a progressive caucus. And then in a couple of days, we started reaching out to progressives in the rural areas. And within a couple of weeks, we had counties in all of the districts. It took us 72 hours to get enough members in every legislative district in order for us to be able to be certified as a political caucus. So 72 hours is something to be proud of. And y'all rural folks rock.
And yeah, on the screen, the next episode of Southern Shift is going to be the District 77 open debate. That's going to be on January 8th at 6 p.m. Same channels, Facebook, I believe Twitter/X, and YouTube as well. We'll have that.
And if y'all want to take part in these, if you want to help produce, then yeah, fastest certified caucus in DPA history and the most vocal one so far.
Yeah, if you want to help with this production or anything else that we put out as the media group or any of the other working groups that we've got going on are interesting to you, yeah, please go ahead and join us. We would love to have you.
And Leela just posted, she is a candidate in Saline County and is doing that thing that we needed to do, which is reach outside of your district and help out other candidates. She's helping Grant, who's one of the potential participants at that debate, go door to door, using our system as well to accentuate the van network system to start with voter contact. And so if you could see us in person there with that, that'd be great. Is it D Brown Library? Let me look it up. January 8th at 6 here.
And Lilo was just elected as their operations officer for the caucus. Cal's McMath Library.
Okay.
But I think we're at time now.
Perfect. Well, this was good. I didn't die. You didn't die. We didn't get embarrassed. I didn't
I think
freak out my hands this time. Yeah, Leela would love to help out. Leela is helping out with keeping our work groups like on the up and up, setting goals, also helping other candidates reach out to us as well. We'd love to give you some tools and toys. We are collaborating with national organizations to bring resources of many types to the races because we got to kick some butt. We got to break the back of that supermajority, and it's going to be really hard to do. And I'm under no illusion that we're going to do it immediately this year, but we got to give them help. So join, so we can start worker cooperatives and build a strong progressive power base in Arkansas politics.
Thank you all for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of your evening. We'll be signing off now and hope to see you again next month or see you in the Discord.
See
Bye.
y'all. I'm gonna make me a pizza.